Well, hello there, and welcome to your second year research paper. One of the important things in writing your paper is knowing the standards by which journal articles are evaluated. And to help you in this process, we're going to share with you the rubric on which you'll be evaluated. So let's get started. In linguistics, we talk about the given new structure of communication, and this applies especially when we consider the theoretical framework. One of the things you want to do to demonstrate the relevance, importance, and contribution of your study is to show what's already known in the field about that topic or issue. So you want to be sure that you present a strong case for the significance of your topic by having a rich theoretical or policy background presented fairly without any obvious gaps or misrepresentations of the literature. You want to make sure that your research problem or question is presenting what's new. What are you going to be adding to the field based on what is already known? So the theoretical framework establishes what's already known. The problem formulation is where you're going to be establishing what new contribution your study is going to make. In other words, why is your study important? What is the purpose and scope of your study? What are the problems and issues that your study is addressing in the context? And you'll provide a description of the approach that you're going to take to address it. In other words, you're presenting why your study is important and how it's going to contribute. This could be done in a variety of different ways. It could include an elaboration on an established line of theory and empirical research. So you're fine-tuning it and you're explaining how your study will elaborate or test or enrich that theoretical perspective. You may find that existing theory do not explain the phenomenon of interest, and you may propose a whole new theory. So in doing so, you'll clarify what that new theory is, how it relates to existing theories and evidence, and the new theory about why it's needed and the scope of its application. Your study may also be motivated by practical concerns, and so you'll clarify what those concerns are and why those concerns are important and how your investigation is going to address those concerns. A fourth option may be that your study may, in your literature review, you may find that there's just very little research about an issue that you think is very important. And what you're going to do is you're going to clarify what information is lacking, why that lack of information is important, and why it's important to study this, and how your investigation will address that lack of information. So you want to make sure that you've got a thorough, clear review of the literature so that you're able to provide a clear rationale for why your study is useful. You may find that you'll find that the purpose and scope of your study might not be clear enough, or your study isn't adequately situated in the broader context, or there isn't enough provided about why your study is important. And another reason why someone might get a revise and resubmit is that the scholarship may be incomplete or not entirely relevant. Now that you've established the theoretical framework, identified the problem that you're going to address, and provided a clear rationale in how you're going to address it, the next comes the evaluation of whether or not the data sources and evidence you use are well matched to actually answer your research questions. So you want to present with clarity not just the units of study and the means through which you'll be running the analyses and running your study, but also providing evidence that you actually have the ability to answer the questions that you're asking, that your data sources match the goals of your study. If you're providing an intervention study or comparing two different types of treatments, then you also want to make sure that there's sufficient information provided and sufficient clarity that you can tell the difference between the treatment and comparison conditions, and that you can have enough information about the fidelity of implementation so that you can interpret your findings. So times that students received revise and resubmit was when the units of studies weren't very clear, or the intervention wasn't fully described, or that features of the control and comparison groups weren't clearly described. Because qualitative and quantitative research are so different, and in fact APA has different journal article reporting standards for each, It's important to keep in mind that the method sections will be evaluated based on the type of research that you're doing. If you're doing a qualitative study, then you want to be sure that the development and selection of the quantitative measures or qualitative classifications or coding that you use are described completely enough so that someone could replicate all your procedures. You also want to be sure that the classification scheme is clearly described with concrete examples that represent the range of phenomena that are classified, and the information on the backgrounds and trainings of the coders, intercoder reliability, or outcomes of reviews by other analysts is provided. For more information about writing a qualitative method section, you can find that in the qualitative section of this website, and you'll find the APA Journal Article Reporting Standards for qualitative research. Quantitative studies will be evaluated with different criteria, and those are aligned with the Journal Article Reporting Standards for quantitative research. One of the key issues with method sections is providing sufficient clarity and thoroughness so that your study can be replicated. So you're going to be sure that the data elements and organization are described clearly and succinctly, and that you provide a clear description of your sampling flow. So for example, you provide information about recruitment, statistical power, if the sample size differed for those that you recruited, those that agreed to participate, and those who completed your study, you'll provide an accounting of that. If it's an intervention study comparing treatment and control, you're going to want to provide information about whether or not there's differential attrition. You also want to provide evidence about the validity and the psychometric wellness of the variables that you're using. So if you're using established measures, so standardized measures, you'll provide information about the measures' validity and reliability. If they're researcher constructed or curriculum-based measures, you'll provide information about their psychometric features. You'll also provide relevant descriptive statistics such as means and standard deviations for continuous variables, frequencies for discrete variables with few categories, and correlation matrices, especially if you're going to be running more complex statistics. You also are going to be sure that your analytic method is appropriate to addressing the research question. It's clearly articulated and effectively implemented. So you'll provide a rationale for the development or selection of the quantitative measures. And if you've used any qualitative classification and coding, you want to make sure that it's all present and it's clear. The analysis and interpretation refers to your analytic plan, your results section, and your discussion. In other words, you're laying out for the reader what you did to come to the conclusions that you had. Your analysis and interpretation is judged based on the procedures that you've used for your analysis. Were they precise? Were they transparently described from the beginning of the study through the presentation of the outcomes? So there aren't any just trust me's in there. You want to make sure that your reporting is clear about how the analysis procedure addressed your research question and leads to the outcomes that you've described. You want to make sure that the techniques you use for analysis are sufficiently described so that the reader understands how you came to the conclusions that you did. They understand how the data were analyzed, and they understand the assumptions that underlie the different techniques that you used, whether it's discourse analysis or statistical analyses that you used. You want to be sure that the analysis and the presentation of your outcomes make clear how they support the claims or conclusions that are drawn in your research. You'll provide any information about intended or unintended circumstances that might have implications for the interpretations of your outcomes or limit their applicability or compromise their validity. So if key participants have left the site, or there was changes in memberships or group, or if there was withdrawal from the study, you will provide clarity and honesty in what happened so that if there are anything that could affect the interpretation of your study, people are able to do so. You also want to make sure that your conclusions provide a statement of how the claims and interpretations address the research problem. You want to show how these conclusions connect to, support, elaborate, or challenge conclusions in earlier scholarship. and you want to emphasize the theoretical, practical, methodological implications of the study. Students who have received a revise and submit for this might not have been clear in the relationships among the analysis procedures, the outcomes, or research procedures. The analytic techniques might not have been sufficiently described, so there was a lot of guesswork on the part of the reader. You might not have been sufficiently clear in how the analysis and outcomes support claims or conclusions that are drawn in the research. And you want to make sure that the presentation of the conclusion clarifies how claims and interpretations address the research questions. So you don't want the reader to have to do the work for you. You want to walk them through your findings. You want to walk them through your interpretation so they are able to see the connection between the evidence you present and the conclusions that you draw from your study. Additional criteria include the presentation of ideas. So you want your independent thinking to be clearly evident throughout the study. You also want to make sure that you show the reader throughout your study how your paper is going to contribute to our knowledge of education, learning, or development in a significant way. In other words, in your literature review, in your results, in your discussion, throughout you want to walk the reader through what the contribution is that your study is going to be making. You'll also be evaluated on the quality of your writing. So is language used skillfully to communicate complex ideas? Is the writing polished? Are there transitions and connections in the paper that are logical and smooth? Is the writing well edited and follows grammar and spelling conventions? Finally, your paper will be evaluated on its scholarly style. So currently we're using APA 7th edition. So you want to be sure that you're following the APA style guidelines. We have a link on the page for APA resources that you can access for free. You also want to make sure that your paper is clearly organized and effectively organized. You want to make sure that you are consistently providing credit to other scholars' ideas through appropriate citations, and you want to use a scholarly voice. You want to use the scholarly register of the English language. So we wish you the very best of luck on your second year research paper, and happy writing.